Today is the fourth day of this April 1985 7-day retreat. Right now, I'd like to discuss something, talk something over with you, which is brought up frequently in meetings, and that is the whole matter of effort. As one person asked it, what is right effort? Some other people reported that when used to practice with great effort put into one's practice, concentrative effort put into one's practice, and as one remembers, there was a lot of energy, and maybe even some attention, some deepened attention came from this energy. And now, in seeing some of the goals one had strived for and dropping those goals, the effort is dropped and one feels a low energy or lassitude, as one person put it. So then the question is there any effort in attention, in awareness? Should I put any effort into this? Some people ask. First of all, if one has been used to put a lot of effort into what one has called one's practice, into questioning a koan, or doing an inquiry like, who am I? That has involved, hasn't it, a lot of willpower, sometimes sheer willpower, wanting to get through, wanting to get the goal, the reward, the enlightenment, an experience which one hoped would take care of one's daily problems and difficulties. So effort implies willpower. The two go together. And willpower is the me desiring something and applying itself and all its resources to get it, to get there. And in this struggle and fight against distractions, we talked about that yesterday, against maybe the resistance of the body, there's always some degree of conflict. There's comparison with other people, rivalry, from which one may either receive additional energy if one feels one is in the forefront, or the energy is doused if one feels one can't keep up with the others. One is a loser, a failure. So, as people report, one has applied this effort, and one has had often results of energy, of highs that have been reached, albeit they were usually followed by lows, by depressions, when the effort let up and the retreat was over. And not applying this effort now, this wanting to attain a goal, and the willpower exerted, when that is not there, then where is the energy? Doesn't seem to be anywhere around. One seemed to be just floating, as one or two people described it. Maybe this is like someone who has used substances to inhale or to drink, to get a high or to get a boost to the energy. And one needs it again. If one doesn't get it, then there are what is called withdrawal symptoms. The body has gotten accustomed to it and now misses this injection. And then one wonders, what should I do? How can I get my energies going, maybe in a less violent way? Which is again seeking for something to happen, to attain some state of high or higher energy. If one walks around outside or looks out of the window, listens to the bird, sees the clouds moving, at times with such incredible speed. The wind beating the rain against the windows, bending the trees, and the trees creaking while bending, and the grass getting greener every day. The puddles either getting bigger one day or smaller the next day. Who's putting out the effort? Who's controlling it or applying willpower to have rain today and sun tomorrow? That stream that gushes over the rocks, all the different sounds and foam bubbles here and twirls and whirlpools there, and down the cascade. Does that exert willpower? Is there effort in it, or is it just flowing, happening? Everything interconnected as one total movement of life. If one walks up the hill or down the road, or sits under a tree, or lies down in the grass, just being there and asking for nothing. Asking for nothing. And it takes subtle attention, because one may be asking for something in a very hidden way, but it can be discovered. And if there's just attention, Isn't one part of this whole energy? Part of this whole life? If one feels isolated from it, walled in, what are the walls? What is this feeling of isolation and loneliness? What is the feeling of low energy or lassitude if one doesn't try to immediately get to some other place, away from where one actually is right now? See, this is the thing with effort and willpower. It seems to be always away from what is. In one's thought and imagination, striving toward that promised land, and not at all in touch with a land where one is, on which one sits. So what is wrong with a feeling of floating or low energy if one doesn't compare it with previous states of high energy or states that one has read about and not experienced oneself? Others have reported about it. If one drops those comparisons and ideas, seeing how they separate and create a wide gap between where one is and thinks one ought to be. If one just is there, either questioning or attending, it doesn't matter. Just being there. Does that require effort? Does it require effort if there's no thought that things should be different? And no thought of, I give up, I'm no good for this. No thought of resignation and no thought of ambition. And temptation for ambition is great because it can inject immediately some energy to get there. Away from this present state which is unexplored and unknown, neglected, ignored. And it may have so much to reveal if one's just with it. Attending to it, not with effort or with the expectation of results, but because it's there. It may change altogether. People ask, but how do I do that? How do I do that? Attend without effort. If one asks in this way, one is already looking for some kind of a way to apply effort or will. It is not a matter of how to do it, it's a matter of doing it. Attending, listening, feeling. Becoming aware one has been swept away in daydreams. It's a marvelous thing that one comes to at one moment, realizes that there have been daydreams. And at that moment, can there be simple awareness without any reaction to what was or could have been? or should be. So that no energy flows into resistance or conflict or ambition. It just remains right with what is. We may have an altogether strange idea of what high energy is from past experiences of having whipped ourselves into it or having been whipped into it, or taking drugs. And having a fixed idea what high energy is, one looks down or discards anything that isn't like that image or memory. So can one drop all ideas about energy, high or low, and just attend to where one is this instant? Living with a feeling of insufficiency, if that's there, lack, inner emptiness, and not moving into the world of dreams, because there's a real serious interest, serious concern with this state which one has always escaped from. Putting oneself down through descriptions and labels is also an escape. What if one didn't know this state at all, but felt a real yearning to know what one is this moment, regardless of what anybody says, thinks, or has said or written about it, or what one knows about it from past experience? Listening so openly, so quietly. And not asking for anything. You may say, well, what if all kinds of thoughts invade the mind? What of it? They do. At that moment there's no attention. Or is there? One is carried by pleasurable or fearful thoughts, totally involved in it, there is no attention. If there is a moment of attention, what is there? Do the thoughts continue? Is one fighting it? Exerting willpower to suppress them? Why? To get an empty mind? Listen to see what has been going on and attend for whatever length the attention may stay. One thinks, I must prolong it. That's not attention, that's willpower and effort. But to see at a glance where daydreaming and thinking takes one, which is usually in circles, or into emotional states, which then generate new thoughts, and those thoughts generate new emotional states. Maybe when a thought comes up at a glance, one will not go on with it, because one sees the whole thing, one has been through it so many times. Attention does that. It can be done with something that is understood. Not learned as a rule, but understood from having been through it, from knowing it. And that attention that does not go with the thoughts, that is done with them, that's not an act of will or effort. It comes out of understanding. Maybe if things are not clear in this, you can bring it up in meetings. We can go through it again. We'll now go on with the koan. The title of which is Joshu Sees Two Hermits. Joshu was a Zen teacher. I think most people have heard that name. We had just the other day a koan. Who didn't settle down as a teacher in a fixed place until he was 80 years old. He traveled around freely visiting other teachers, monks, talking with them in the way that teaching, learning took place in those days, by usually through dialogue. A challenge would be thrown out and a response would be made. Maybe another response, or just that was the end of it. Sometimes someone who traveled around like this would stay at a place where felt something could be learned. In this case, Joshua's traveling around and drops in the huts of two hermits who are sitting in solitude in these huts. It doesn't give us much explanation. And it doesn't really matter. Joshua came to a hermit and asked, "Are you in? Are you in?" And the hermit held up his fist. And Joshua said to him, the water is too shallow for a big ship to anchor here, and went away. It's a combination of translations again. He comes to the little hut, maybe knocks, maybe he just opens the door, maybe it doesn't have a door, and says, "Are you in?" And the monk raises his fist. And Joshua says, "Water is too shallow here for big ship to anchor." And he leaves. And he goes and visits another hermit, sits someplace else in a hut, says same thing. "Are you in?" And this hermit too raises his fist. And Joshua says, "Freely you give, freely you take away, freely you bestow life, freely you take life away." And he makes a profound bow. Listening to this story, the two encounters, what does one make of it? What's one's first impression? One hears this. Two people making the same response, that's what the koan says, raising their fist. And in one case, Joshua says, "Too shallow. Goodbye." And in the other case, he says, almost like, "Wow." He doesn't say that. But freely you give, take away, kill life, bestow life, and this profound bow to the monk, to the hermit. What's one's impression? What's one's reaction to this? Many reactions possible. Isn't it usually the first reaction that one thinks one did a good job of holding up the fist and the other, I was just so. One had tremendous energy and the other one raised it in lassitude. So, how would you feel if you sat in that hut and somebody came, asked you something in here, you respond? And this person, maybe you knew him, maybe he was famous, he was supposed to have been very famous. And he says, this water is too shallow for a big ship to anchor, turns around and leaves. How would you feel? Does one feel put down? Does one think I should work harder? That's what he's telling me. Does one feel hurt? I After all, that was a good response. And he didn't see it. Where did he have his eyes? Or this being a great teacher, one thinks there must be something wrong with me. He sees right through me. Sees this is not the optimum response. I gotta find a better one. And how would one feel giving a response to this question, are you in? Yes, or the fist. And here comes this tremendous verbiage. Well, I'm calling it verbiage. It may be taken as really a praise from the highest quarters. Telling one, I've got it. I'm free. Free to give life, free to take life away, free to this, free to that. And I'm being bowed to. By a famous teacher. I must have something. Or one has already felt one has something and just feels that confirmed, affirmed. And it has made one's day. The energy is even higher than it was at raising the fist. Feels so good. Somebody has recognized one, praised one. My efforts have been rewarded. Taking what he says, I really must be quite developed or advanced. That's one way of listening to what Joshua said. Is there any other way that one could listen? Not with these conventionally trained ears, trained in praise and reward. Listening through an image one has of oneself. And that image being hurt, attacked, put down, and therefore anger or a feeling of rejection, feeling of depression. Because someone has knocked it. And that someone being a teacher of whom one also has an image. Being somebody who must know. And the other hermit, is he flattered? Does he feel flattered? His image feeling flattered? Because it is always an image that either feels hurt or flattered. I may be making an assertion, but one can test this out for oneself. When one is hurt or flattered, if one wishes to really delve into it, what is it that is getting hurt? What is it that is hurting? Or what is it that feels so good right now, so flattered and lifted up, uplifted? If it doesn't have to do with self-image and the image of the one who deals it out. Let's say these two monks were sitting there. Just sitting there, attentively, at times dreaming, sleeping. But no image about themselves. Let's take that. I'm this, or I'm that, I'm good in my practice, I'm not good. And someone knocks and asks, are you in? And the fist goes up. It goes up because there's no image. What I should do, just a response. I guess we probably here wouldn't raise a fist if somebody says, how are you? There were certain responses in Zen training. One would say fine, or yes, or no, or whatever. I don't know what I would say. But the response comes out of no image, just out of the question. The question and the response are together. They're not separate. And then this person says what he says. Water's too shallow for big ship to anchor. So, there's no image of oneself and of this person. Maybe one gets an inkling what he's about, what he's trying to do. At that time, people who were doing this work were constantly testing each other. Probably for the existence or non-existence of debilitating images. So he turns around and leaves, so he turns around and leaves. That was his thing. Why be affected by it? One hears the whole thing. There's no image there to bounce off from, or to get hurt, to get dented or inflated. Then one hears what somebody says. It's amazing, somebody referring to himself as a big ship. That sounds suspicious. Doesn't quite make sense for. And on the other hand there, for just saying, I'm okay, or raising the fist to get all of that, this also doesn't make sense. If one doesn't have this yearning like a dry sponge to be flattered, soaking it up. Then it seems kind of odd that he should be saying all of this and bowing. But it needs that state of sheer, simple, pure attention, without effort to hold up an image of me or you. That effort already prevents a clear perception of the event. Clear perception of what's behind the words. Not just the words themselves, but what's behind them, or between them. Let's read the commentary here from Shibayama. It says, both held up their fists. Why did he approve the one and disapprove the other? Tell me, where is the core of the complication? It's a good question to ask of oneself. Sometimes people say, I have no good questions. I'd like to ask a question sometimes, but no question comes. This is a good one. Where's the core of the complication? If one sits in confusion or conflict, or in a state of fog, as sometimes people report, it's just like fog. Where's the core of the complication? The fog? Is that the complication? Or the confusion? The tiredness? Low energy? Or is the core of the complication something different? The finding fault or the wanting it to be different. Or clinging to it if it's a state of pleasure. State of joy, the clinging to it. I must keep this for a long time. That's maybe the core of the complication. The image I have of myself that I'm foggy. And should be bright. Is that the core of the complication? Here Mumon says, if you can give a turning word on the point, turning word meaning if you see into this thing, if you understand it, and if one understands something really, on a deep level, one can also put it into words, fumbling though they may be. If you can give a turning word on this point, you will see that Joshua is unrestrained in saying what he wants to say, and utterly free, either to help one rise up or push the other down. Or to see whether any one of these hermits were rise-upable or push-downable. May not have been. It's not that Joshua went around praising and blaming the people he was visiting. It was a test. Challenge. And sits 24 hours a day for I don't know how many years in a hut. It's good to get a challenge. One may feel so peaceful having resolved all problems with self-image and relationship. Somebody comes in and says, you are no good for me to stick around. He goes on, be that as it may, do you know that the hermits also saw through Joshua? What does that mean? The hermits also saw through Joshua. How does one see through a person? I think we mentioned it in the opening talk or sometime first talk. There's a lot of buzzing around of this concept, seeing through somebody. And we usually mean it in terms of reading that person's thoughts. What does it mean that the monks also saw through Joshua? Could it mean on the very simplest level, just hearing those words, out of emptiness. Emptiness of image, self-image. Then there's no complication. It's clear. The words were spoken and then he leaves. There's no interpretation necessary. And the whole matter ends if no complications arise from it. It's finished. No grudge needs to be carried and no flattery needs to be carried. It's finished. It wasn't even started. Can one live that way? At least at times. In our close and more distant relationships. Watching what it is that immediately bursts out in defense or offense or hurt or flattery, and starts the complications going. Here, Mumon says in the commentary, if you say one hermit is superior to the other, you haven't got it. We didn't go into that, but that's what happens too if one, maybe we did mention it, here's the story, hey, one must be better than the other. This is how our thinking has been conditioned in constant comparison and evaluation. And school begins with it from kindergarten. It's probably already beginning in pre-kindergarten. The evaluation, the grading, which is partly where we get our self-images from, how we have been graded by others. When I went to school in this country, I was coming to this country, I was already in my early 20s, and went to college. And back in Germany, it seemed that a person who went to university already had sort of a feeling of vocation. There's a lot of cultural conditioning in that. You knew what you wanted to be, and that was your vocation, else you didn't go to university. Things may have changed by now. But at that time it was like this. And here I was amazed to find that in the freshman year, a lot of students didn't know what they wanted to do, they just went to college. Because that's what one did. And then, if they got a good grade in history, they would say, I guess I'm going into history, because I'm good at that. And not even a feeling, it was sort of just going by the grade. Now, this may be not a typical thing, but does the mind become aware of this? Grading one person against another and grading oneself against others, either higher or lower, and all the misery that flows from it for oneself and for the relationship. Can one observe that? And in the observation, drop it, maybe? Or does one see how much security one derives from grading oneself better? Until such a moment that somebody else is better than one, and then it's the opposite, and one is depressed. So here he says, if you say one hermit is superior to the other, you haven't got it. Then he says, if you say there's no difference between the two, you haven't got it either. Of course we're different from each other, at least on the surface. Each one with their peculiarities, idiosyncrasies, special talents, special looks, size, shape, color, hair. One moment one person has an insight, another moment somebody else has an insight. At the moment that first person is inattentive. There's a poem which says, his eye is a shooting star, his spirit is lightning, a sword to kill, a sword to give life. I know what this poem is supposed to do. Maybe to describe Joshua. What good is it to one if there is someone whose eye is a shooting star and whose spirit is lightning and he has the sword to kill and to give life? Is it talking about oneself? Is it so? Is one's eye like a shooting star? Does one see at a glance? I don't know. It's dangerous to describe oneself or others in these terms. When describes others in these terms, there's a tendency to want to venerate that person with all the complications that come out of that. So much easier to venerate someone whose eye is a shooting star and whose spirit is lightning than to look into the dullness of oneself that may pervade the body-mind temporarily. Because nothing is permanent. Changes, mind states and body states change like the weather. I think anyone going to retreat witnesses that very vividly, the changes of states of mind and body. What does it mean to be alive? Does it mean to feel good all the time? Full of energy? Or deeply aware of what's going on inside and out, whether it's painful or joyful? With an awareness that does not grade. We will end here for today.